Early Bird YouTube channel, brought to you by Red Heart Yarns. In this video, I will show you how to make this super cute color block back scrubber. This uses a brand new yarn by Red Heart called Cotton Scrubby. It's the scrubby yarn you love, but now it's made out of 100% cotton, and it is so wonderful and soft, and you will just simply fall in love with this. It is the perfect yarn to use for a project just like this. Great for Mother's Day, Father's Day, teacher's gifts, housewarming gifts, you name it. This is a great little gift. This pattern is really easy to make and uses very simple stitches. I will walk you through how to do the ribbing, how to do the seed stitch, and then how to create the casing and the final little pull parts for the back scrubby, and you are guaranteed to have a really great project. This is a free pattern available over on redheart.com. You can find a direct link to the pattern right down there in the video description box below. And while you're down there, go ahead and smash that like button, as my kids say, to let other people know you enjoyed this video and to tell me that you really like the videos I am putting out there for you. Why don't I go ahead and show you the materials you'll need for this pattern. For the color block back scrubber, you will need the free pattern. Once again, it's available on redheart.com. Along with the pattern, you will need one ball of 3 different colors of scrubby cotton. You will need a pair of size 7 knitting needles or 4.5 millimeter. You will need a tape measure, and you will need a bent tip steel tapestry needles. Last but not least, I always like to include a good pair of sharp scissors. Go ahead and gather your materials, and we'll jump in and I'll show you how to make this really great back scrubber. Are you ready to make this really fun pattern? Let's do this. We will begin by placing a slip knot directly onto our hook. To make a slip knot, take your tail and place it in the palm of your hand. Take your working yarn, wrap it around your forefinger and middle finger, and when you come back up, cross over. Then turn your hand right side up, go underneath the front loop and grab the back loop and pull them off of your fingers. You now have a slip knot. You will take one needle and place that slip knot directly onto the needle, and as you separate the tail and the working yarn, it will snug up that loop directly onto your needle. This does count as one stitch. We are going to cast on 18 stitches as is written in the pattern, and we're going to use a long tail cast on, but I'm going to show you an alternative way to do the long tail cast on. This is the tail of the yarn, and what I've done is I'm going to grab the tail and I'm going to take my thumb and I'm going to scoop around the yarn just like so. Okay? Once I've done that, I take my needle, I will go up the thumb. Now I will take my working yarn and I will wrap my needle around with the working yarn. Once I've wrapped the needle around, I take the needle and I scoop it through that loop, that hole that I have right there with the thumb, and then I let the yarn fall off my thumb, and I've cast on another stitch. Let's do that again. You want to make sure you grab the tail and scoop the tail around so it looks like this on your thumb. Take your needle, go up the thumb, take your working yarn, wrap it around your needle, and then you have this window right here. Can you see that window? It's just the space. And you will swing your needle right through that window without picking up any extra stitch or anything, and then let it go off of your thumb. So that's 3 stitches because we've count our cast on, our slip knot, and then we cast on 1, and there's our cast on 2. So we're going to do it again. Grab my tail, scoop, go up my thumb, go around my needle, out the window, and off my thumb. I want to do this until I get 18 stitches. Once you get 18 stitches on your needle, it's time to jump into the pattern, which is a knit 2, purl 2 ribbing. So we will turn our work. So I put the needle with all the stitches into my other hand. I will grab my spare needle and I will begin with a knit 2. So I will go into the first stitch, and you want to make sure as you're working with the scrubby yarn that you're going into the actual stitch and not into one of the nubbies that come off of the core of the yarn. So you go into the stitch, and working now with just the yarn that's coming directly from the ball, You will wrap your needle, pop out that stitch, and then have the stitch that you went into jump off your other needle. I go in the stitch, around the needle, out the stitch, and off. So I just knit 2, and now it's time to purl 2. When you go from a knit to a purl, it's important to remember that you take your yarn, go between your needles, and now you can purl. So I go into the stitch, go around my needle, come out the stitch, and off. Go into the stitch, around my needle, out the stitch, and off. So I just purled 2, now I need to knit 2. I go between my needles, put my yarn to the back, and now I am in position to knit 2 stitches. I will continue in the knit 2, purl 2 pattern all the way down the row. When you get to the end of the row, you'll end with a knit 2, and your work just looks like it has just a little bit of stuff coming off of your needle, but it looks about like that. You will turn your work then, and you will continue on in the ribbing pattern, knitting your knits and purling your purls. These first 2 stitches, I can see my 2 purl bumps right there, and I know that I'm going to purl them. I also know that I ended with 2 knits, so when I turn my work, I will begin with 2 purls. Once you can get that rhythm of the knit 2, purl 2, knit 2, purl 2, and then turn your work, and you start with purl 2, knit 2, purl 2, knit 2, you're going to do that for 2 inches. Once you have 2 inches of work, it's then time to move on to the seed stitch pattern. Let's go ahead and begin with our purl 2, so you can see how you would begin with a purl. You simply put your needle in and purl the stitch. Put your needle in and purl the stitch. Move your yarn between your needles, and now you will knit 2 stitches. As long as you are moving your yarn between your needles as you go from a knit to a purl or a purl to a knit, you will not get any extra stitches and everything will go just fine. So go ahead and get yourself 2 inches of ribbing. Once you have 2 inches of ribbing, your work looks a little something like this. And what's great is this little bit of ribbing is actually what will become the casing for the handles of the back scrubbing. Now that we've done the ribbing portion, it's time for us to move into this one singular row where we will increase by 1 stitch. So the pattern wants us to knit 9 stitches. So I am going to just go ahead and knit 9 stitches. So 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Now it wants me to do a make one. So what I want to do is I'm spreading my stitches apart, and can you see that string right there? That is actually the string that connects this stitch to the stitch over here that I just knit into. So what I want to do is I'm going to take my left hand needle and I'm literally going to just scoop up that string. Okay, so I scooped it up. Now what I want to do is I will take my right hand needle and I am going to knit that string into the back leg. So I'm into the back leg of that string and I simply knit it. And what I've done there is I've just increased 1 stitch. So I did a make one. I'll show you that one more time. I'm going to take that apart. Let's do that one more time. I'm going to take my left hand needle and scoop up that string. And then I'm going to take my right hand needle and I'm going to go into the back leg of that stitch that I just put on my left hand needle. And I will yarn over and pull through a stitch and off. And now I have an extra stitch over there. So I had knit 9, now that would give me 10, and it's time to knit 9 more. So I'm left with 19 stitches. Once we finish the row with the increase, it's time to jump into seed stitch, which is really easy because it's a combination of knit ones and purl ones on one row. And on the next row, you do the opposite that you would do in ribbing. We will knit our purls and purl our knits. So it's really not that difficult. It's easy to keep track. You're just always doing the opposite of whatever the stitch is you're working into. So let's go ahead and we will jump into the seed stitch right now. So I'm looking down here and I know that we are going to work seed stitch along this row. So let's go ahead and do that. And I will begin with a knit 1. So I will do a knit 1 and then I'll bring my yarn between my needles and I'll purl 1. Bring my yarn between my needles and I'll knit one. Yarn between my needles and I'll purl one. And you'll notice I am holding my yarn in my opposite hand, but the motion as far as a knit and a purl is exactly the same. I'm going between my needles before I do anything on the stitch, and I'm still going into the stitch the same way, yarning over the same way, and coming out and off the same way. I just happen to be holding my yarn in the opposite hand. There are so many different ways that people knit that I really want to just try and show you as many ways as possible, so that way if you're watching this video and you happen to knit this way, this is helpful for you to see what it looks like to have seed stitch worked in Continental. Because we added that one extra stitch, it gave us an odd number, which makes it so that when you begin with the knit, you will end with a knit, okay? And so then I turn my work, correct? And if I ended with a knit, that means my first stitch is a purl, correct? Well, in seed stitch, you knit your purls and you purl your knits, which means you don't really have to remember what's a knit or what's a purl. If you have kept in sequence of knit one, purl one, knit one, purl one, knit one, purl one, knit one, when you turn your work, you're still in that same pattern. So you would just jump in here with your knit one, purl one pattern. But it says in the pattern at this point, we're supposed to change colors. So what you can do is you can cut your yarn every time and rejoin every time you change colors. Or as the pattern says, you can leave your yarn hanging out and carry the yarn up the side whenever it tells you to do that. But then when there's the bigger blocks of color, like these big sections of color right here, you will not carry the yarn up the side. But down here, as you're just working along these few rows with color, you'll carry your yarn up the side. So let me show you how you would change colors. Let's grab a new color here. Let's grab this really pretty brown color. It's called Tan. Gosh, this yarn is so wonderful. This is going to make such a wonderful scrubby. And all you do is you grab your new yarn, your new color. I am not cutting my old color. I'm going to let it hang out there. Okay? And I will simply just begin working in my pattern, but now I will yarn over with my new color. So I knit one and purl one, and knit one and purl one, so on and so forth. And I just let the old color hang out, and I'm simply just using my new color. Okay, pretty easy, not too difficult. And we continue doing this on with the pattern. So the rest of the pattern is simply just done in seed stitch and changing colors. Okay, very easy to do. What you will want to do is take a look at your pattern and find a way that is helpful for you to keep track of how many rows you have done in each color. For me, I like to keep a little tick mark. So what I would do is I would grab my pattern right here and grab a pencil. And every time I finish a row with one color, I would just put a tick mark. So that way when I get to 4 tick marks, if that's how many rows I'm supposed to do, I know that I have that many rows completed. One way you can kind of have a quick reminder of how many rows you've done is if we're doing 4-row repeats, you will go down and back and down and back, and your other yarn that you've left hanging out is going to be down there waiting for you, okay? So you'll know that if you're at this end and you're like, oh, it's time to switch colors, but your next color is down here still hanging out, you have gone one too many rows, or you have to do one more row because you have to get back to the color that was that's supposed to be next in line, okay? So I'm gonna get down to the end of this series of colors with the tan, and then I am going to then switch colors so that way you can see how you would float the color up along the side, okay? As you can see, I'm to the end of my 4th row, and I'm at the end of my needle, and my other yarn is right down here waiting for me. So as I pick up my needle and I turn my work, knowing that now I'm supposed to use this really, really great pink coral color, it is down here waiting for me to use it. So what I'm going to do is I am simply going to take the coral color, float it up along the side. I want to make sure you can see this with all the tails hanging out here. I will float the coral color up along the side of my scrubby right here, and I will begin working in my stitch pattern using the coral color. But I do want to make sure that I'm not making those stitches so tight that it's making it pucker along the side here. I want to make sure that it's nice and not loose, but you don't want it to be tight, okay? So just make sure you're not pulling it super tight, that it's just laying there and it's not making the fabric itself pucker up. And all you'll do now is you just continue on in the pattern using your new color. What's great is as you keep going along and you switch colors for this portion of the back scrubby, for all of this portion here, because it's just 4 row repeats. And so you change colors every 4 rows so you don't ever cut the yarn, but you still maintain the seed stitch pattern. Then when you get over here to this section, you would cut your yarn, join that particular color, and work until the piece measures 11 inches. And then you would change yarn and you would do this section, and you do it until the piece measures 14 inches. Then you go back to changing colors every 4 rows again, and you would finish off with some ribbing that we did at the very beginning. And that's all it takes to complete the back scrubber portion, okay? So it's some ribbing, some seed stitch, and some color changes. Really easy. Once you've done that, you then need to go ahead and make the casing portion. Now, obviously, I don't have the full amount of scrubby right here, but I can show you how to do the casing portion with this little bit that I have. So let's do that. When it's time to do the casing, what you will do is take the tail that you have left over from your long tail cast on and go ahead and thread that directly onto a tapestry needle. Okay, we are going to use this tail to use it to seam this casing closed. And all we are going to do is take our edge here that was cast on, and I'm going to bring it up right next to where the color changes from my coral to my tan. And I am going to just do some simple whip stitches. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab one of the coral colors that connects to the tan and then come through the edge of my cast on and just pull that yarn through. Okay, I'm just seaming it closed. So I'm going to come up here, grab my yarn there, come down here and seam it closed. And I will do this all the way down the row to create a casing for the handles for the back scrubby. Really, when you get to the end just like this, all I'm going to do is I am just going to make sure that I have made this nice and secure. So I will do a series of simple hitch knots right here just to make sure that it is in here really well, and give that a nice big tug, snip my tail, and now I have a really awesome casing, correct? So I have a hole right here. I could really just stick my finger all the way through, but that's where I will put the back scrubber handle. Now, speaking of the handle, it is so simple. It is done simply by casting on 40 stitches and then knitting them. And then as you're purling, you bind them off. So you bind off purlwise. That's it. Once that's done, you thread the handle right through the casing and your back scrubber is complete. So I want to show you how to do the handle portion. I'm just not going to cast on 40 stitches. I'll just cast on a few so you can see how you would knit a row, purl a row, and bind off at the same time. You already know how to do a cast on. I showed you that earlier, so I just put on a few stitches on here. I'm simply going to knit these stitches, okay? So this is what you would do. First, you would be casting on 40, and then you simply would knit those 40 stitches. And so that's what I will do. I'm simply knitting the stitches that I cast on just so you can see what it looks like. When I get to the end of this row, the next part of my handles say that I'm supposed to purl across and at the same time bind off the stitches loosely. So I'm going to show you my suggested way to do that. So I am getting to the end of this row. I will turn my work, And then I am going to purl my stitches and bind them off at the same time. Are you ready? Here's how I'm going to do this. I will go ahead, I will purl 2 stitches. So my yarn's in front, and I will purl 2 stitches. So there's 1 and 2. Okay, are you ready? I'm going to take my yarn, I'm going to go between my needles to the back, take my left hand needle, and go into the front leg of those 2 stitches I just purled, and I'm going to knit them together. Now that I've knit them together, they are essentially bound off because I'm down to 1 stitch. Once you have that 1 stitch, we need another stitch over here so we can bind off again. So I'm going to bring my yarn between my needles, purl my next stitch, take it off. I'll take my yarn between my needles, so it's in the back again, and then I go into the front leg of this stitch and the front leg of my remaining stitch, and I will knit them together. And by knitting those 2 together in that way, I'm left with 1 stitch, and I can carry on. So this next stitch I have to purl, remember, so I have to go between my needles, purl the next stitch, go between my needles, and then go into the front leg of the first stitch, go into the front leg of the second stitch. Ooh, goodness, don't want to do that. Don't want to lose my needle, right? Let's put them where it's supposed to be, and then knit them together. I'm going to hold the yarn in my other hand so you can see what it looks like in this way as well. For those of you who are continental, bring the yarn between my needles and purl. Bring the yarn between my needles to the back. Take my left hand needle, put it in the front leg of those 2 stitches, and knit them together and off. Yarn between my needles and purl. Yarn between my needles, go into the front leg of those 2 stitches, knit them together and off. Front leg, or front of the 2, let me try to say that one more time. Go between my 2 needles and purl. Go between my 2 needles with my yarns in back, take my left hand needle, stick it in the front leg of those 2 stitches, and knit them together. I'm going to do this to the end of the row. And what I'm doing, just this action right here, just knitting them together through the front leg like that, I am binding them off because I had 2 stitches, right? And now I get down to 1. So then I purl 1, so I got 2. I knit them together through the front leg, and I'm down to 1. I purl 1, I have 2. I put the needle in the front leg, I knit them together, and I have 1. I purl them, I have 2, into the front leg and knit them together. I have 1, purl, I have 2, knit them together through the front leg, and I have 1. What I would do here is I simply would cut my tail, and I would leave my tail just a little bit longer, so like maybe 6 to 8 inches, because then you can use your tail to go ahead and seam the handle closed. Let me show you what we're going to do. If this were longer, obviously it would look like it was a really super long tail or a long handle, but this is the handle. See how it has a really good stretch to it? And it's because of the way we did that bind off. It gives that little extra fabric up top, and it allows for a little bit of stretch. And the reason you do it in that stockinette is because it makes it so it kind of has this little natural curl to it. Okay, once you've done that, you would make 2 of these handles. So we have bound off, and then you would make the next one using one of the other colors that you've used for your piece. Once your handles are complete, the last thing to do is to add them into the casing. So all you do is bring over your work with the casing, and you can go ahead, and if you want to grab a crochet hook, it works really well. Just grab a crochet hook and go right in through the casing. I'm putting my crochet hook, oops, it's wanting to go in another place, through the casing here. Let me get it all the way through the casing. So my crochet hook is through the casing, and I can just grab my handle just like that. You see I just put it on the hook right there, and then I'm just going to thread the handle, if I can get this just like so, pull that through the casing. Obviously my handle is short, guys, it would be, yours would be longer, but you would pull it through the casing, okay? And then you would take your tail and you would weave this end to this end on the handle, okay? So your final handle would not be this short. Yours would be longer, and it would resemble something a lot more along the lines of this, okay? So using a crochet hook to pull your handle through the casing works really well, and it's actually recommended in the pattern. But your final back scrubber will look something along the lines of this. You have simple ribbing, seed stitch worked along the scrubby back scrubber portion itself, and the reason we use seed stitch is so that way it does not naturally curl on itself if we were to use stockinette, and so the seed stitch makes it lay really nice and neat and straight. And then once you've done the seed stitch, you go back to ribbing down here, fold over your work, create the casing, create your handles, and boom, you have a really fabulous gift, a wonderful color block scrubby. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and you'll come back here for more videos right here on the Marley Bird YouTube channel. Make sure you check out the Marley Bird Facebook page. It's just facebook.com/Marley Bird. There's a free video every week teaching you how to become a better knitter and crocheter. I'm Marley Bird, proud spokesperson for Red Heart Yarns, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.